is Emily MacDonald, and I am a soil conservationist here in Homer at the Homer-NRCS office. Today's presentation will be about farm planning with NRCS and how we can help. Oh, cool, it still works. The clicker still works. That's great. So, kind of an overview of what we're going to be talking about tonight, who NRCS is as an agency. What is a resource concern? It's kind of a word we throw around a lot at NRCS. I'm trying to help explain to people what we're doing. What is conservation technical assistance? What funding options do we have through NRCS? And how to get started with NRCS. So who we are. We were founded as an agency out of the Dust Bowl in 1935. There's a lot of lore around the creation, but essentially Hugh Hammond Bennett, the guy pictured there, did a lot of work around soil erosion. And he basically talked in front of Congress until the Dust Bowl arrived in Washington, and then they passed the original act that created our agency, known as the Soil Conservation Service, which then in the 90s transitioned into the Natural Resource Conservation Service. The original goal, we didn't even have any money associated with us. Our original goal was just to help people. Think of us as like extension agents. The goal was to help farmers handle erosion, understand their soils, and implement best management practices. Alongside us in the 1940s, they decided we needed more on the ground options that weren't the big scary federal government. So that's how Homer Soil and Water came to be, and other conservation districts around the country. We work very closely with our partners and have since they were created in the 40s. Our motto is helping people help the land. That also came around in the 90s, and that's just kind of our ethos as we as an agency. We want to help private landowners manage their land to their goals and also with conservation in mind. The cool thing about NRCS is we are voluntary and non-regulatory. So until you get involved, we're not breaking down your door to go into your property or anything like that. You have to come to us first to initiate the relationship. We obviously have rules once you're involved, but there isn't, we're not like an EPA or Army Corps of Engineers. It's all entirely voluntary participating in our programs. We're focused on improvement and building your land Can they hear me? Cool.
No complaints right now.
Sweet. So a key thing for us is resource concerns. If you've ever had an NRCS staff person out to your property, you might have heard us talk about a resource concern. And it's definitely, we easily slip into our agency jargon, but essentially a resource concern is how we put terminology on what we're seeing on your place. Like, we have to label it, we have to justify actions that we're taking. So our goal is to identify resource concerns. They are inherent, they're not inherently a super negative thing. Don't be offended if we say, oh, this is a resource concern. We're just trying to put it in our language to justify how we're helping you. And then we treat resource concerns with conservation practices. So a resource concern is the degradation of soil, water, air, plant, or animal resources. And we have priority resource concerns based nationally or set by each individual state. NRCS officially has 47 resource concerns right now. So this is a large breadth we cover, right? We only work on a few here in Homer, and I'll talk about that in my next slide. And then we have 175 conservation practices. And again, these are things like your high tunnel program. That's used to treat a resource concern. You can use multiple practices to treat one resource concern or multiple resource concerns. An example I like to use, and this is one I see a lot in Homer, is you want to grow better vegetables in your garden and preserve your land's natural beauty. Maybe it's value for wildlife, maybe there's aesthetics. There's a lot of really cool land out here, and that's why people move to Alaska. But there's also a stream that runs through your property that contains salmon. So you want to be aware of that and you're considering that. And so if we were to come out to your property, things we might talk about would be plant productivity, nutrient transport to surface water, soil quality limitations, aquatic habitat for fish or other organisms. And so what do those even mean? So plant productivity would be something like stunted plant growth. Maybe you're having a visible nutrient deficiency. If your plants were purple and little, then we would say there's a plant productivity issue. You know, just because you can't grow tomatillos here, that does not mean you have a plant productivity issue. But if you're struggling to, you know, get broccoli or potatoes, then that is a plant productivity issue. And we would look at treating that through a high tunnel or applying nutrient management, which means soil testing and applying amendments correctly. We would look at working with you on your crop rotation to help mitigate pest issues, or maybe adding some cover crops to help improve your soil. Nutrient transport to surface water is a bigger risk for the stream, right? We would maybe advise you not to grow your garden right next to a stream and then dump a bunch of fertilizer and things right there, because that runs a risk of, you know, washing away and running into the salmon stream. On the flip side, we can also help if you already have a garden established. We could put in a filter strip to help add more grass and biomass between your garden and the stream to reduce that risk. Soil quality limitations. So this is, we dig a hole in your garden and we would look at what's going on in your soil. This could be anything from a soil aggregate to how quickly water is going through it, to whether or not there's a lot of physical biodiversity within your soil. And we could treat that with basically any of these on here. Aquatic habitat for fish and other organisms. Maybe you have an old road that runs through the stream. And so when you guys want to get to your house every day, you're driving back and forth across this little salmon stream. That's probably not great for salmon habitat. And so we would be able to potentially help you get yourself out of the river and, you know, prevent erosion and things from happening into that. If you wanted to really focus on the natural beauty of the land and the forest, we could potentially look at forest stand improvement, which is a very vague one. Honestly, that's the one that covers the most options within it. But we could look at thinning for spruce bark beetle, or we could look at replanting some trees. So there's a lot of different things you can do to improve your forest. Does that help people kind of get an idea of where we're coming from as we go along? So this right here, I just wanted these two photos, but I think it shows like before and after really, really well. This is a project down in Southeast Alaska. This is a salmon stream, and this is the one on the left is what it looked like before. So as you can see, if I was a fish trying to swim through there, I would have to be incredibly athletic to get all the way through to reach the rest of the stream. And on the right is a bridge and a culvert that we helped pay to install, that opened that habitat back up, restored it, so now the salmon can get through and people can also get across more effectively. Just to kind of show you that before and after. Resource concern is fish passage. Practice is aquatic fish passage. So what about your resource concerns? I put in a bunch of photos here of projects around the state. Some of them are Homer based. But I wanted to take a second. So tell me about things you see going weird at your property. If there was a larger group, I would love to hear from you right now. But tell me, you don't have to say a resource concern, just be like, I see this eroding away, or my trees are doing this, and then I'm gonna put it into the NRCS lingo. If we have people who want to participate.
I like to try to use the elevation contours of the property that I'm on, where on the wetland maps it's considered a discharge slope. And I do have some locations that like to have a temporary pond or a temporary
Mhm.
puddle. So I like to have the idea of being able to aim that water efficiently to get it down to a muskeg, and in the future, I have probably an 85-foot diameter by about a 15-foot deep depression. That's just the perfect shape and size already to dig it out and line it with clay and use the overflow that's seasonally flooding the muskeg to create a water resource for whatever's needed, you know?
Yeah, so we don't do ponds sadly anymore, but for a resource concern, I would say there's two parts to this I want to address. First off, for a resource concern, I would say that is a water quality limitation or water quality for wildlife, right? So you want to be able to collect the water so it's more accessible to the wildlife, or I know you have livestock, so you might be interested in that. It does get a little tricky when we start messing with wetlands. So we obviously have Army Corps stuff at NRCS. We do have our own wetland rules as well, and we can't manipulate a wetland to create more agricultural ground. So there's a dance we can do there. That specific situation, we could potentially work around, but it would be very site specific. And if anyone on Zoom has something similar, please talk to your NRCS office if you want to be eligible for our programs before you go messing around with a wetland area. We can definitely work with it, but it takes a lot of careful, precise planning. Yeah.
Cause they're protected, wetlands are protected.
Yeah, so I could do a whole presentation on wetland policy, and honestly, I'm not qualified to give it. I know the stuff that I need to look for
Yeah.
specifically, and especially up here, wetlands like discharge slopes are so, not necessarily unique, but they're tricky.
Is the Army Corps of Engineers interested in anything beyond a lake bed or a kettle or a riverine? Like, do they want to be involved in discharge slopes and upland wetland complex?
So their map should be predetermined with your property. So if it's not listed as already with Army Corps, then as far as I know, that's, if it's defined on your Army Corps map, then you should talk to them.
Okay.
If it's not defined by them, USDA, we define our own wetlands. So when you sign up for our programs, we come out and we determine the map for what our program's justification is. There's similar processes, but not exactly the same. And yeah, wetlands can get very tricky very quickly. So I always recommend with every specific circumstance for a wetland, go talk to your planners. Yeah, does anyone have any ideas for another thing?
Nothing on the Zoom just yet.
I have a scenario, Emily and I have talked about this, but I have ducks, and I have a lot of ducks right now, maybe more than I need. But with all the rain that we've had recently and having a lot of ducks in a small space, I noticed a stream, for lack of a better word, of poopy water headed down the hill, and there's a stream at the bottom of the hill. And so I just was concerned about nutrients and pollutants going into the water. And it doesn't look like it's making it all the way down to the creek yet, it's going into the ground, but it could with more water. So we were just talking about,
Yeah.
what could I do?
So Monica's situation, if we couldn't hear it on Zoom, was essentially she has a lot of ducks in one area, and with the weird weather we've been having in Homer, it's led to all the duck manure and whatnot running potentially towards a stream she has on her property. And so that in terms of resource concerns would be nutrients, because manure is considered a nutrient runoff or discharge into a stream. And so what we would consider with NRCS is we would look at something, we have a practice called a filter strip, and this practice is essentially growing specific varieties of grass to help prevent the runoff from moving down the hill and into the stream. We could also look at planting, like we have a practice called hedgerow planting, and hedgerows, they're slightly larger plants. So we would combine that with the filter strip to create more of a physical barrier, depending on what the topography looks like, and just kind of at least disperse the nutrients. If not, just prevent them from going all the way into the stream.
We got a couple in the Zoom now. Okay. We have an area that has lack of drainage causing surface water when it rains or snow melts. It is gentle sloping field. What suggestions do you have for collecting or mitigating the water to make the field more usable? There will be standing water in any low areas. Lots of tall grass grows there.
So if you're looking for cropping purposes specifically, I would, a high water table, I would make sure it's not a wetland first before you do any kind of messing around with that. So once you get a determination on whether or not that's a wetland, then you can figure out how to move forward. So you can, there are things like tile and stuff, NRCS can't pay for that. Tall grasses and things, those do make great pastures. Especially if there's areas that are wet and low, then whatever livestock you decide to put out there, they have access to water, but they also have access to lots of grass. And so a managed grazing system could also be a potential utilization of that space. But I would definitely verify whether or not that's a wetland and talk to your local NRCS office. Yeah. Because
Okay, so no specific recommendations or possible programs for collecting and mitigating that water, let's say it wasn't a wetland.
So if it's not a wetland, which has to be determined by us first, then you would be looking at, if you want to, so we only look at it if it's degraded from the natural environment. So that's not really a degradation issue. That is a how are we better utilizing it issue. And you could look at for the livestock situation, like spring box development potentially. That would be, I think, and when I hear wet, I generally hear, I think cattle and grazing situations would be better than trying to crop it, because water has a weird way of always coming back. You can sometimes move it around, but without knowing the specifics of the site, that one's definitely a
Well,
tricky
if
one.
you didn't wanna do cows, cause maybe you've got a small property or something, what about chickens or something?
Yeah, I mean, you can graze a lot of different things. We don't consider chickens or poultry or pigs grazable, but sheep would be another option. That's definitely very I need to see the site to give you an adequate one. That's why I always encourage people to call, because everybody's property is super different. Even mine and my neighbor's properties are different, and they look different. They have different vegetation types. You need to talk, you need to have someone out there in person, and so we can give you the best advice possible. Yeah.
If it's not wetland and it's more just for private usability, would the short answer be to put in a French drain that runs to an outside ditch on grade and then bring in some 1-inch fill and then make your topsoil on top of that?
So that's not really something we specialize in.
not at
We
all,
only
but-
do it in the agricultural context. It's honestly outside my expertise. Would I do that? Yeah, that's outside of what NRCS can
Right,
do.
exactly, but that would be the context of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably what most private landowners would do.
Well, here's one that's way up NRCS's alley, so, this other person's got a lack of organic material in the soil. They live, in the hills north of Fairbanks.
Okay, so I'm not super familiar with Fairbanks climate as a whole, but my general recommendation, if you're looking at a lack of organic material, I'm presuming you have a garden. Cover cropping, I think it's a super big one with that. Your resource concern would be soil quality limitations. So a lack of soil quality is preventing you from growing. You would cover crops are the easiest way to build organic matter. You could also look at mulching, which is another practice we have, or crop rotation. All of those will help build organic matter. I always recommend nutrient management as well with that, because the nutrient management would allow you to get soil tests each year and track the increase in organic matter. Or if it's not working, we can then change strategies. Yeah, cool.
Okay. Okay, doke, and then, back to when you were talking about filter strips, somebody asked what material is a filter strip?
So filter strips are grass. There are a
Just grass.
variety of grasses, it'll be site specific, what grasses we recommend.
Okay, and I was responding to this one in the chat myself, but since there's a pause here, how do I go about finding out if the area is considered a wetland?
So you would start with, I will go over this again at the end, I'll have the forms listed and such. Contact your local NRCS office, I'll have all of those up. And then we will walk you through the process of starting the paperwork. I don't want to dive too deeply into wetlands just because there is legal stuff around it and it's very site specific.
But basically, NRCS comes out, checks out your property and does a wetland determination, right?
Yeah, over a couple of visits, but yes, we will, you know, you come in, we explain the situation, we will help fill out the paperwork to do it. That will then initiate a wetland determination, and then if you need to do an on-site, also we can kind of get a rough idea by looking at your soil on web soil survey too, if it's an area of concern or not. Yeah, we have a really awesome guy in Homer who does all of or he's in Keene, based out of Kenai, but he has a lot of really great experience, and then there's other people who travel all over the state as well. So with that, that's kind of how NRCS works though, and that's honestly, those are all conversations you have with landowners while you're out in the field. And so, you know, it starts with that, but sometimes, you know, people frequently here bring us out to talk about high tunnel, like that's what they really want. Let's talk about all your other goals too for your property, and you don't have to have a huge property to do things with us. You know, don't worry about trying to turn it into our language. We're your interpreter, you know? So like, let's talk about your ideas. Come with a 5-year plan, come with a 10-year plan, and help us build into that. So first things, one of the first services we ever provided, you know, going back to the 1930s, conservation technical assistance. And that's what we just did. That's when we come out to your property, we take a look at things and we make suggestions and recommendations. The level of detail kind of depends on what you're looking for. Some people just kind of want to walk around and give some general advice, like that's a great spot for a garden. Probably wouldn't recommend it there. Try to keep it away from the salmon stream. Like I might thin out your trees. Free planting advice for agricultural producers. That's essentially what that's our bread and butter. It looks very, very different in every state, every operation. In Alaska, I mean, everyone has a different technique they're trying to manage their land. And so it's a really fun challenge to work with everybody up here. Our goal is just to identify the resource concerns and kind of put it in in a more summarized, you know, you might be like, oh, this is eroding or this is flooding, but put it in a language where we can actually, you know, solve the problem that you're having.
So quick question then, so you said this planning advice is for agricultural producers. You know, we all know people who aren't farmers that have high tunnels or you've worked with, so what do you mean by agricultural producer? What's the parameter for that?
So subsistence is agriculture in Alaska, and so anybody who's producing any kind of food, fiber, or fuel off of their property. So that's whether you're managing a forest for wood, you have some sheep for fiber, or if you are growing, you know, crops for a high tunnel, all of those count.
You don't have to be selling stuff, you can just be growing it
And
for
you do
yourself?
not have to be selling, because we basically view it, if you're producing, especially up here where everything's so expensive, you're producing food for yourself, you're producing an agricultural product. Our most common funding mechanism is EQIP, or the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. It's also the way we pay for the high tunnels, like the high tunnel program. There's no specific program for the high tunnels. This is a nationwide funding mechanism, but this is what it is. This is how we pay for high tunnels. It's very structurally focused. So putting in, you know, cross fencing or water infrastructure or a physical high tunnel. There's flexibility within the program. You know, sometimes it's just 1 year, our contract. Sometimes our contracts are 5 years. All depends on what you're looking at doing. The cost share is based on what you do. So the money you get for your high tunnel, we have a cost share rate that is based on the square foot. So if you're putting in a 200-foot square foot high tunnel and our cost share rate is $1 a square foot, then you get $200 for your high tunnel. That's not actually the rate we have right now, but the math is easier. And so that, so yeah, so, or if you put in, 10 feet of fence and we're cost sharing $10 a foot for fence, then it's $100 we pay you. It's very transactionally based. We need 1 year of farming history for most of this. So, I always say, talk to your planner, go talk to NRCS as soon as possible. It takes a while for, it's a government program. You have to get into the system. We have to do all our paperwork that you don't even see. We need to go out to your property a few times in Alaska. It's really hard to see the issues when it's covered in snow. So that shrinks that time when we can go out to your property down. And then all the payments for equip are made after the practice is installed. So if you want your $100 for your 10 feet of fence, the 10 feet of fence have to be fully completed to spec.
So farm history, let's say I've just got, an acre and I got my little house, I got my little garden. That's a year of what I did on that land with that garden.
That would count.
Is it 1 year being documented, like 1 year after having you guys out there, 1 year after like being on your paperwork?
No, so it's really, we have to be able to see, if we walk out and you have established an orchard area, you have livestock and clearly have extensive livestock infrastructure. There's no official meaning, but essentially you need the year before, if you want to do something in 2026, you need to have us out there in summer of 2025 generally.
Okay.
Once you start working with us, that's not necessarily the case, but getting us out there as early as possible is always helpful. And we can always backdate, or not backdate, that's not the right way to say it. But again, I can look on Google imagery and see when you built your house.
So just a verification from you
I
guys.
really, it's more of an insight verification that there's something happening there. Because people have tried to put high tunnels on parking lots, and that's not really the goal of the program.
If I could add, I feel like the classic problem that we see is people want a high tunnel specifically, and they want to put up a high tunnel so they can grow things and they're not currently growing things in the spot where they want the high tunnel. And with NRCS program, you have to have an established garden in that exact spot before you
actually
can
have
get
a
a high
spot.
tunnel. So that's but if you already have a garden, that's great.
Yeah.
They can figure out.
And you can grow things without a high tunnel. I feel like people are like, oh, I can't grow anything without a high tunnel. Potatoes grow great, cabbage grow great, broccoli grow just great outside, lettuce, greens. Maybe they're not your favorite thing to eat, but there's lots of useful vegetables that you can use outside that grow great. Common project examples. So we have high and low tunnels. You need to have that year of garden history established prior. A contract might include a high tunnel or low tunnel, but then on top of that, we might add nutrient management, especially if you're a really new grower. Getting your soil tested regularly helps you build your organic material. It helps you adjust your nutrient levels as needed. We can do crop rotation. If you don't have a lot of experience gardening, maybe you want help planning out how you're going to plant your plants to prevent pests from accumulating or other bacteria, or from stressing your soils. We can do irrigation projects in and outside of high tunnels. And so essentially we can help pay to put drip tape in, we can help pay for water storage if it's needed, we can help pay for the pump, and all sorts of other parts of an irrigation system. That will come with irrigation water management. Irrigation water management is essentially just tracking your water application throughout the growing season. We did a talk on it 2 weeks ago now, talking about how to manage your water for your irrigation or for your vegetable garden. We also help with grazing. If you have an established perimeter fence or grazing area, we can help with things like cross fencing, prescribed grazing, which is also known as rotational grazing, and then water for your livestock as well. High tunnels, I always put a slide in here for the high tunnel program because that's why most people are here, to learn about high tunnels. There's a 5-year lifespan for a high tunnel, so it means it has to be up for 5 years in that location. So you can't install it, have us pay for it, and then pack it down and move it somewhere else. There's exceptions for if you move your property and thing, and some you have a specific circumstance, we can definitely talk about it, but that is the general rule of thumb. It needs to be over a cropped area. Again, going to that cropping history. Where you want the high tunnel needs to have some kind of garden. you have to have less than a 5% grade. Here in Homer, we have a lot of properties built into the hill. So there's going to need to be some kind of dirt work done to make sure that you have less than a 5% grade. It doesn't have to be done prior, but it needs to be done prior to it being installed. So if you have it out there, like, it doesn't need to be level. It is paid by the square foot, and it needs to be a kit. So you can't DIY a high tunnel. It does need to be a kit. There's a couple of common brands that Homer Soil and Water can talk to you about. But if you have a brand that maybe hasn't been seen in Alaska before, just ask us about it and we can see if it meets our specifications. The majority of the space, once you have the high tunnel installed, needs to be used for crop production. So you can't park your tractor in there or, put out some lawn chairs because it's a nice protected area in the fall from the rain. It's supposed to be there for cropping. We also have the Conservation Stewardship Program, and this is a program designed for people who maybe you already have your high tunnel, or maybe you don't want a high tunnel, but you have a really large garden or other agricultural operation. This program allows for us to get into advanced management. So it lasts for about 5 years. It lasts for a hard 5 years. So there's no flexibility. There's no modifications within the contract. Like, you need to know how your operation functions prior to starting this program. And we can flush through all those questions with you. But you definitely need to have a really good idea of like what your plan is to be a part of this program. It's really management focused. So it's taking your soil testing to the next level. It's taking your grazing to the next level. You have to have crop records for 4 of the last 6 years prior to 2018. So right now, this one, we're definitely hitting the lifespan. And as soon as we get a new farm bill, we're presuming these years will change. But until that happens, this is unfortunately kind of where we're at. The record, so you have to basically have a garden starting in 2014. If you have forest land, you only have to own the property for 1 year. So if you do have forest acres and want to participate in CSP forestry, we can definitely work on that. There's an incentive payment based on the resource concerns met at the time of the application. So that means we give you a bonus payment for doing things really well already. So you're already meeting a certain number of resource concerns to get into the program. You don't have issues that need to be fixed. You're just improving stuff, and that's the goal of CSP. And your payments are made once a year. So that's another really important thing, is they're paid every year in October. You don't, so sometimes you have to be able to put the cost of something for longer than, if you install something in July, you're gonna have to wait till October to receive your reimbursement for it.
Wasn't the CSP money like hiked way up recently?
Yes. Yeah, so CSP is, we were previously trying to really get as many people involved as possible. And the biggest barrier right now is just the history on the land.
Is that, when you're talking about forestry, does that mean that, you're going through, you're thinning trees for the life of the tree, you're
Yep.
skirting trees for the health of the tree?
Yep.
And kind of managing it more like a long-term timber?
Yeah, so it's not specifically for timber operations, but it's just overall health and
Yeah.
vigor of the stand, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's definitely something we can work with people on. Other quick programs we have, these aren't super common in Homer. Equip CIC, it's essentially it's not super popular up here. We have specific practices, but it's designed to be a hybrid between CSP and Equip. It's a hard 5 years, and you do your practice every year for 5 years. And then we also do have agricultural easements. This is based on your soil type. We have a whole person dedicated to doing agricultural easements. So you don't necessarily have to have true farmland to be an agricultural easement, but it has to be land that is deemed it could be farmland and really high quality farmland. So this program is really popular in Wasilla and Palmer because of all the development that's going on, and it helps protect the land from development. So, real reason you're all here is how to get started with MacDonald. Set up a meeting. I have in 2 slides all of our contact information. We have offices throughout the state. Either shoot us an email, a phone call. We all have work cells, so you can also text us. Whichever form of communication is the best for you. We can go that way. And we will walk you through the process of getting your records established through the Farm Service Agency. There's essentially 3 primary forms we need to fill out. One is for your individual record as well as anyone else listed on the deed. So if you and your partner are both on the deed, then you both will have to fill out one of these forms. We need a form to essentially establish you as the land operator. And then we will need a map with the area you're cropping, if you're cropping the area. And then we'll also need a wetland form, which is the 1026. So all the people listed again on the deed or associated with the land will need to fill that part out. Then we'll set up a site visit with you during the snow-free season, and that's how you really get the process started. While you don't need to have a solid plan of like, some people are like, oh, I just don't know exactly what I want to do. That's totally okay. You don't have to, I think the biggest barrier is just getting in the door with us. Once you're in the door, then we can talk to you. But if you don't ever call me, then I can never come talk to you. The paperwork too, it's also really important so that we have your contact information, because I know I can be quite forgetful. And so we will call people who have started the process with us and kind of like check in with them in the spring of each year and be like, hey, do you want to try for the high tunnel, or are you looking at something else? And we can have that conversation then as well. So yeah, do we have any questions? And here's our contact information for those. We have the North Hub, Elizabeth up here, most of Alaska. Then we have Central Team Southeast, and then West Team is the Kenai Peninsula.
You had mentioned that they do work with cross fencing.
Mhm.
Do they do work with perimeter fencing?
No. So essentially we don't help with initial infrastructure. That's kind of our big, that's like, we're supposed to help existing agricultural operations. So perimeter fencing, and by cross fencing and stuff, we don't mean moose fencing. We're talking like cattle fence or sheep or goats or something like that. So once you have your area, I always recommend perimeter fencing as much as possible, because I can't pay to like outline anything, but once you have a really large pasture, we can then assist potentially with cross fencing and getting water out to that pasture, but you have to have that initial, just like you have to have the garden established for us to help you, you have to have your pasture established. And you have to own livestock. We have people who are like, this is my grazed pasture, and I'm like, where's your animal? And they don't have animals and they're not renting it to anybody. Like, well, I want to eventually get a goat. And I'm like, okay. So yes, you do need livestock, either whether it's rented or you own livestock of some kind, and then the perimeter fence. Any questions in the chat?
Not yet.
I got one. So if someone was looking into buying property or land and they wanted to be involved with you guys, would they want to purchase something that had already been set up as a farm to have that, year-long of?
All depends on, so if you really wanted to start a farm and be a part of the CSP program, then yes, like that could potentially benefit if your goal is to start a farm, and like there are pros and cons to that. But in general, like we can work with land at any stage. Also, our rules are constantly changing, and so I wouldn't want to make anybody to make like long-term decisions based off of an NRCS policy on something. Like I said, NRCS is funded through something called the Farm Bill, and the Farm Bill, well, we're on the 2018 Farm Bill, and it expired in 2022, and it's now 2025. And so it's been due for quite a while to be updated, and so at some point it is going to change. We just don't know when yet. Yeah.
In your experience, or in the Homer Water and Soil and the NRCS experience combined, what is the biggest thing or some of the most common things that has somebody walk out the door like, I thought I was gonna do this and I ran into these hurdles and now I gotta go back?
That's an awesome question. I think it's twofold. The first one is, I think, so there is money up front. Like, we aren't paying the entire cost of high tunnels. Sometimes you can math it out to make it work, but we have standards and specs. Like, you can't just cheap out on the high tunnel and try to make money. Like, that's not the goal here. In South Dakota, when I worked there previously and I was working with producers, we used to say 60%. That's not really a fair rule of thumb anymore. Like, it's not really a percentage. We're cost sharing, we're not covering the entire cost of these things. Like, they're improving your agricultural operation. And it's great that we get to help. We do have, for people who are beginning farmers, we do have an advanced payment option where you can get money up front, but that still might not cover all of your costs up front. So you have to have some capital available for these programs. And that's definitely a boundary, not boundary, that's definitely can be difficult for some people. Like, life's expensive right now. And the second is sometimes the programs, like our timeline, like people really want a high tunnel that summer, like that's just not how our timeline is set up. Like, our programs take time. It's kind of like if anyone's ever done like a home renovation project, and you're super stoked at the beginning of the process and you're like really excited, but then over time, like little things kind of fall to the side and sometimes it just doesn't become a priority in life. Priorities shift. Like, our programs, we try to make them as easy as possible, but like, I need you to respond to phone calls the first time I call. I'm not going to, once you're in a contract, it's a whole other ballgame. But as we're starting out, most of us have like a 3-call rule. We'll call you 3 times, but if you don't respond, I have other people who are interested in these programs, and I'll just wait for you to come back. So yeah. And life gets busy. And some years, like, I had somebody who, we started the process and then she got pregnant with twins, and decided not to proceed forward because she was going to be very busy the next couple of years. Life happens and we totally get that. But we're always here and we'll always be here.
Somewhat related question from the chat. Do you need to be registered as a farm to be able to work with NRCS?
So you don't have to have like a business license or anything like that. You do have to have records with the Farm Service Agency, which inherently turns your land into a farm. And those were the forms that I showed earlier. So you don't have to have a business license. You don't have to be selling stuff to be a farm. We do have to put your records into our system to start the process because one, that's your contact information. I also have to do maps and things like that. And so I need to be able to see your land unit in my computer.
We got a couple of kind of livestock related questions. The first one's shorter. What type of materials are accepted for perimeter fencing?
So I always operate off of red face test. I can't think of any policy necessarily, but it needs to be an effective fence because if we just pay for cross fencing, and I don't know if you can see me on, can you see me on Zoom when I do that? So if I made like an X, right? You just have a square and you have this, but your perimeter fence sucks and we pay for cross fencing and your animals are still going to escape and that's not going to be able to facilitate the program. Like, our goal with cross fencing is for you to be able to move to each of these quadrants and contain the animals. So you need to be able to prove that it's functional. And if it doesn't function, then we can reserve, like, if you have like maybe you borrow your neighbor's electric fence to have perimeter fence, and then you get rid of it and we show up and there's no boundary, like, we can't pay for that fence because it's not functioning as we intended. And if you have a specific idea in mind of what you want to try to do to make your fence, we can definitely discuss it. Like, there's no hard fast rule, but you need to be able to justify to me that that's a functional fence.
On a similar note, new land obtained. Used to have a large hayfield 15 years ago. Once the pasture had been perimeter fenced, can NRCS help with planting of pasture grasses?
We can. So are you saying you currently own?
They obtained land in the part that I'm not quite sure I understand right. It says, read it again, new land obtained, used to have large hayfield 15 years ago. Once the pasture has perimeter fenced, can NRCS help with planting of pasture grasses?
Yeah, so yes, that would definitely, so within any of those, there's obviously caveats. So if we pay to plant grass, then we have to manage the grass appropriately, and that can be through haying or grazing of the grass. But we need to make sure that it's not being like, we're not gonna pay to put grass out there and for you to then just overgraze it in the first year. Does that make sense? So it sounds like we probably could help you, once the perimeter fence is functional. And I would reach out to your office and set up a meeting. Also, your initial meeting with NRCS, plan on about an hour. I know it seems excessive, but it's a lot of paperwork, and honestly, people get really excited when they start talking about your land. You know, I get excited talking about your gardening goals and hearing about your chickens. We like hearing about that stuff, and so we want to hear about all your goals for your property and why you chose that property. Also, another side note is you don't have to own your property to work with our programs. Your landlord just has to be okay with you doing it.
And yeah, this pasture would be for horse grazing.
Okay, yeah, we can do horse grazing, it's just you have to manage it appropriately. Are they located in Homer?
Couldn't say.
Or? Yeah, I would shoot,
Soldotna.
I would shoot Meg an email, and if you're located in Soldotna, and then from there, she can assign you a planner and they should be able to help you out with your specific circumstance.
Folks in the Zoom world, you got any other questions for Emily here?
Normally I say, give me a challenging one, but I don't want any more wetland questions. So, anything but that, no, I'll answer wetland questions within my ability.
Have you ever seen anybody try to do a multi-cropping silvopasture style, grazing the understory?
Silvopasture?
So we can actually pay for grazing and silvopasture management. So I haven't seen it that I can think of up here specifically managed for it, like people own livestock and they graze under trees, but I wouldn't call it necessarily managed for it. It's just, that's where the stuff's growing.
Right, they're not counting their cow days before they rotate them.
Yeah, and so that's definitely, that's definitely something. And we could also help manage the forest, so maybe open area, like help identify areas, maybe open it up a little more to improve the grazing potential, planting new trees, so there's a diversified stand, all of that. When you're dealing with most forestry related things, we need to do a forest management plan. And that can add it takes a little longer, like forest management plan, we have to come out, we have to inventory your whole property, and we have to do some data analysis and such with it. And so that, I would definitely, if you have forest land, get in contact with us as soon as possible, because that takes a little more prep. You know, it's not just going out and going, oh, cool, you have a garden and your soil looks okay. You know, I'm walking around for a whole day potentially at your property.
Here's a good question. Has anyone used alders for a perimeter fence?
So I think when we're talking about perimeter fence, we're typically talking about it needs to be a man-made fence. Unless you can prove to us that your livestock truly cannot get through it. Yeah.
There'd be some pretty thick alders.
There have to be some pretty thick alders
You can turn
and,
them into hedgerows like they did in the old country.
yeah, I mean, yeah, if you did a whole, like, if it was the British countryside and you
Yeah.
moved your alders through your trees, then I think that would count. Yeah.
All right, so that, back to the person in Soldotna that's, planning on doing some horses with the new property. If they're interested in a high tunnel, do they have to have 1 full year of a new garden here in 2025? So they can talk about a high tunnel for 2026.
So, yeah, so the way you would want to go about that is contact us, sooner the better. Then the spring, plan on planting the area, you want the high tunnel and slightly larger. So if you want a 20 by 20 high tunnel, plant a 20 by 20 garden in the footprint you want it. And then give us another call, we'll come back out, verify, and then we'll get into the real nitty gritty of the high tunnel. And we can also then talk about your pasture and like what your goals are for your pasture.
So you want a 30 by 100 foot high tunnel, because you wanna go big, you better have at least a 30 by 100 foot garden
Yes.
on a slope that you can later justify having to be 5% or less.
So it doesn't, that's the thing, it's like, if you wanna start, like, if you need time to, if it's a lot of dirt work, then I would recommend against this, just for the sake of time, I'd probably level it first, but you in theory could plant your hillside and then level it all after. Your NRCS person is going to be very skeptical, but if you can prove us wrong, I'd love to see it.
We're right at seven.
Oh,
Yeah, you seem like you had another question.
are there any drawbacks or any down the road negative impacts of being listed with the Farm Bureau or being listed with the NRCS or the Farm Service Agency?
So we share records, but essentially, like, once you're in our system, our rules apply.
What do those records subject you to, worst case scenario?
So I guess they don't really subject, like, we don't check your property. Like, we don't go out, the only thing would be if you drain a wetland for the purpose of producing a crop. Then if you had received money from us prior to that, we would request that funds back or for you to fix it. That's really the only like catch up here. In other states, that's a really big deal because in the Midwest, you're dealing with millions of dollars a year potentially over the course of 5 years. Like, we had a client a county over who had to pay back $5.5 million and like nobody wants to do that. A $10,000 high tunnel payment is very different. So the only time is if you start really messing with your wetlands. Essentially, if you have records within the Farm Service Agency, we're just gonna have your individual, like, we'll have your social security number because we have to link you to the IRS and all of that. But your record just hangs out forever. And then if you were to move to another state or another area, you could just add yourself and move your record with you as you move. Yeah, we don't really do anything with it unless you want us to.
Back to the idea of the high tunnel and planting the garden now. Can a location change for the high tunnel in 2026 if NRCS suggests a better location? So let's say they planted a garden, they got kind of willy-nilly about it, you guys come out there and you're like, you should have planted it over there.
So the only time we really recommend people move their high tunnel is if it's like, or where they want their high tunnel. I always recommend giving yourself at least 12 feet around your high tunnel from like buildings or anything or road. Well, there's an easement off your roads, but then your driveway, anything like that because of snow. Like, high tunnels are physical structures, they are permanent, so really think out where you're putting it. We had someone assemble their high tunnel and then realize it blocked a portion of their view. And like, it's not the end of the world, but like, it's also, you don't want to block your view. So, really think about that location. The only time we'll really look at moving it is, if you were on a wetland, then we have a specific policy for that. And we can work with you on following that. That's also too, like, we can look at aerial imagery right now. So if you go meet with your planner or your local office right now, then we can kind of like help, should be like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
So if a planner came out there and thought drainage was better on a different part of the property or sunshine or something like that.
I mean, if you were telling me you were putting a high tunnel up in like a closed grove of trees, then I'd be like, I don't think this is a good idea. Like, we need, again, red face test, so we need good, decent sunlight. But if it's like one side of your property is a little more open than the other, like, we're not gonna care about that. It's really your decision, it's your property. Just remember that these are relatively permanent structures, so you wanna, not put them in the middle of a pathway that you use to get to your shed. Because every single time you have to walk around it, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it will become a big deal.
Yeah, and I guess if somebody's looking to install a new high tunnel and they don't know where to put it exactly, like, you guys could come out and help suggest, right? They would you'd wanna do it early in the season, so
Yeah.
you can still plant.
So you would wanna have that conversation in May and get us out there. So we need to be able to justify that as like a full cropping season, so we have a rule of like, of July 1st.
So should they be calling over the winter to try to get a time slot booked for May?
So you're not gonna be able to get a site, we normally don't book visits that far out unless it is there's like significant travel. So, like I book travel to Port Graham or the Aleutians, months out. If I can drive to your site, we don't need to book out that far in advance. I would suggest meeting with them and doing your paperwork first. Cause no one wants to do paperwork in the summer, winter is a great time for all your paperwork. So set up a time, to meet with the NRCS office, go over your paperwork, fill it all out. We can look at some aerial imagery and kind of suggest some stuff. We'll look at soil maps, and then in May, we'll come up with a time for us to come back out then. Yes.
Does the agency tend to have a bias towards wanting to stick with native species? Or are they open to species that maybe aren't native to Alaska, but that are food bearing? Are you guys gonna be pissed about English walnuts, black walnuts, butternuts, elderberry?
So it depends, like, if we're paying for it and under what context. Like, I don't care what you grow. Well, I
Okay,
do care, it has to be federally legal, so that's,
Right, no, but that's what I mean, like
Yeah.
barring any kind of extreme.
Yeah.
If they're not gonna come here and say, we can't touch your land, we can't help you because you're
No.
doing this.
no, so we wouldn't, as long as it's not illegal and federally illegal, then, we don't care. We plant non-native species. We obviously we would never pay for like an invasive species or a species that we have no proof that can thrive, but if you want to experiment, go for it.
Okay.
And
I'm
it's
all
worth
for
looking into what's being deemed
Mhm.
invasive these days, I mean, if you wanna plant a vetch or something like that, it turns out bird vetch is invasive, so like looking into where in
Yeah.
your area of
Yeah.
Alaska, things might overpower your native species.
We're non-regulatory,
Yeah.
like really the wetlands is the only time things can get, as long as we're not paying you for it, you can essentially do whatever you want outside the
Okay.
wetland stuff.
I've had people's hearts broken when they come here and they're like, you mowed the fireweed. How could you?
Yeah, we don't, Like, I mean, we're an agricultural agency, so I mean, we see broken ground all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't care about that stuff. It's just a matter of whether we can't always pay for it.
No,
Like
that's
black
fine.
walnuts, I don't think that's a tree species we'd be able to pay for.
No, I'm not asking as
yeah,
far
but
as,
if you-
I'm asking if it would bar you,
No.
if the private activities of the landowner would bar them from.
No, as long as it doesn't
participating in
impact like
Yeah.
what we're paying you to do, then you're fine.
Like you can't grow weed on.
programs. No, that's a federal thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, inside. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's really the only like food production thing, or like if you were to, or like you can't have you're not supposed to have livestock in your high tunnel. Those kind of things, like those, but none of those are inherently gonna bar you, like we do give you the opportunity, if there is an issue with something that we've paid for, we give you adequate opportunity to fix it. Like if people have a high tunnel collapse, we give you time to fix it. A tree collapses a fence we paid for, we give you time to fix those things. Like, we do not want to be the bad guy. We like the fact that most of us like the fact that we're not regulatory and we don't have to, enforce laws. So we're very flexible.
Good.
Yeah, so plant whatever you want, as long as it's not invasive. I can't promise you it's gonna grow.
That's fine.
And you said they don't want livestock in the high tunnel, but people can let ducks go in there to get after the slugs, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can use them for, we call it gleaning purposes, but it can't be like their permanent shelter. Again, we're also not like checking your high tunnel either, so do with that information as you may.
Right, cool.
And and if you have any questions or any other thoughts, please give us a call, or I guess email us is what I put up here, because that seems to be the way most people reach out to us is email, but our phone numbers are all very easily Googleable as well, and so I encourage you always to talk to us and at least open that pathway of communication. Thank you.
Yes.